welcome to Why We Are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott. We're talking with Cliff Silliman. He goes back to the early days of the Jesus People movement in Berkeley and Marin County. He is in Washington now. He says he can see the city of Victoria, British Columbia, from where he is. And so, Cliff, welcome again. Here we are.
Thank you.
Now, I always ask this question. You know, I'm a Baptist preacher, you understand. I have to ask about, did you get baptized?
Yes.
Who baptized you?
Reverend Ducille in San Francisco 2 weeks later. It was on the 26th of December. A church there in San Francisco just off of Mission underneath the freeway.
1970. No, was that the First Baptist Church of San Francisco?
No, this was a Pentecostal church.
Okay. And how did you find your way there?
They came to I moved into the Baraka house a week after I got converted. So I became a Christian on December 11th. December 18th, 19th, I moved into Baraka house after I took care of cleaning up the mess I had left behind. And then at that Saturday night meeting, this guy was at our meeting and said, if you guys want to get baptized, instead of doing it out in the Pacific, in the middle of winter, come and use our heated baptismal tank. And we'll have a potluck. So we went out down there on a Saturday afternoon, about 8 or 9 of us from Baraka House, and 3 or 4 of us got baptized.
I remember that now. I remember that now, Cliff. Who was running Baraka House at that time?
Ken Sanders and Gary Bartholomew.
Gary, Kenny Sanders, my old buddy. Kenny Sanders and Gary Bartholomew. I remember Gary Bartholomew. He had been part of the Holy Innocents Episcopal Church in Corte Madera, I remember.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And Gary had been with us when we went to Atlanta, Georgia, on our big trip. He played a drum. I remember Gary. I haven't seen him in several decades. So you were baptized.
He passed away last year.
He what?
He passed away last year.
I did not know that, Cliff. I'm sorry to hear that. Gary and I were quite close. He was a tremendous young man. Now, this is in 1970 that you were baptized, right smack dab in the middle of the Jesus People movement. So Ken and Mary are up there, and we started a church up in Petaluma. And so I'm remembering a time now. Okay, I'm remembering a time when I would come up there periodically to Baraka House and do a Bible study. Check my memory. Didn't we used to have a Bible study in your kitchen? That's where people were sitting all along their kitchen, in the kitchen.
Living room, and then there was a cutout, then there was a kitchen, and then we'd open up the door to the hallway, and they go down the hallway, and then we had a loft upstairs, and when it started getting really, really crowded, they'd be going up, just sitting on, they could hear, but not see anybody, and if they wanted to share, they had to come down and walk into the kitchen, and flag me down, say I got something to share. And then we did that until we moved. That's because of overcrowdedness. I mean, it was a 2-bedroom little, farmhouse, and we'd be getting, 100 and plus come to the Saturday. I mean, we moved into a church building and used their fellowship hall in town after that, just because it was too hard to accommodate everybody in this, little house.
Baraka House became famous because there was somebody put out back east, some Jesus People group, a newspaper that listed the Christian houses coast to coast. And we'd have people traveling all across the country, stopping at free lodging Jesus People houses. And one of the guys was a guy by the name of Barry Elegant. You remember the name Barry Elegant, Cliff?
Oh, certainly.
Now, this was a turning point for us. I'm going to give you my recollection. I'm not supposed to talk this much, but correct me when I'm wrong. I had gone up there. There was a Bible study. I would come up there maybe once or twice a month. Barry, I didn't know who he was. He was there, and he got converted. Is that your recollection?
I led Barry the Christ after dinner. We would go, we had a 1-ton Ford pickup truck, and we would go to all the places that people were hitchhiking up 101 and pick people up and bring them home for dinner and say, look, this is Petaluma. You're not getting a ride out of here tonight. You're stuck. Come to our house. We'll feed you, get you breakfast in the morning, and bring you back to the highway. And
I had no idea you were doing that, Cliff. That's the first time I heard of that. I'm in charge of the whole thing, and I didn't ever know about that.
Yeah, we do that every night. We'd be picking up people every night, and bringing them home for dinner, witness to them.
Cliff. So now back to Barry Elegant. Now Barry Elegant had come out on a motorcycle. I think he had
from Chicago.
From Chicago. Okay, he came out and he was there, and he became a Christian while he was there at Baraka House.
Mm-hmm.
I think I got the story right. When he left you a check for $3,000.
That is correct.
You called me the next morning, and we used that money to do something that was unbelievable. We started our first Christian house in San Rafael, the Marin
Christian bookstore.
The Marin Christian General Store. We had the word general in there. I don't know why. And I have a picture of you and I'm hoping to put this on the screen so people can see this photo of you and I and Betty Kenner, who was the head of started that Christian bookstore, our first manager, and a young man named Keith Fink. And we built that Christian bookstore. We basically built the Church of the Open Door off of that. And we started a Christian bookstore in Petaluma. You ran it.
Mm-hmm.
You started that. I remember, Cliff, you and I we searched all over Petaluma to find a place. You opened that store. We opened one in Novato, San Francisco, I think Point Reyes, and one other place down in the South Bay. You remember that?
We had Sonoma too. Sonoma opened.
That's right. We had one in the town of Sonoma. That was what was his name? He graduated.
Don Micheletti.
Huh?
And,
he graduated from Don.
Don Micheletti was the.
Don Micheletti. I remember a Catholic young man from Carolina High School.
Bill McPherson.
Yes. So we had Christian houses and bookstores basically from down at Sonoma to San Jose, even
Correct.
at Stanford University. And by the way, Barry Elegant, I think we filmed him. I think he was on this program. I'm not sure. But I've had contact with Barry. His phone number is in my phone right here. It periodically buzzes and lets me know somebody's calling me while we're sitting here. Anyway, so Cliff, one other story. I want you to tell the story about the car.
The true story about the car. You're inaccurate in your book. I was gone on vacation, and we had this Renault, and we had a guy.
It was red, wasn't it? Wasn't it red? Red or yellow?
I think it was red.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking 40 years. My memory, colors may not be totally accurate.
No.
And the person that owned it left. Just left the car, but it wasn't running. It wasn't working. It was old, decrepit, rusty. You know, it's probably 54 Renault or something.
Yes.
And we were trying to clean the place up. When I left to go on vacation, I told the guys, here's the assignments. Get this place cleaned up, call the highway patrol, find out how we get, rid of these cars that we've got that, are out of registration. We don't know the owners, they're abandoned, what do we do? So I come back and the Renault is gone, sort of. On the other side of the barn, the rear end of the Renault is sticking up out of the ground because they dug a hole that was big enough for the Renault if you had put it in by a crane and lifted it up and just set it down this way. But they tried to roll it in. The front end went down, hit. The rear end is sticking up, and then they just covered it with dirt.
Well, I was there. I was there shortly after they buried it, and we were working together, Cliff, trying to clean up this farm, 6-acre farm, because we'd kind of made a mess of it, and so I look out in the field and I can see the Renault sticking up out of the ground. So we went over there, and there was no. So what we got sledgehammers, and we beat the top of that thing down as far as we can and made a little mound of dirt and covered it as best we could. I felt bad for the landlord who owned that farm. He was so nice to us.
Oh, he was excellent to us.
Do you remember his name?
Troop. The last name was Troop.
Okay.
So I always called him Mr. Troop. But the interesting thing, I was doing a TV interview for the Santa Rosa local station, and they were being a little antagonistic toward me, and using Jesus freaks and trying to rile me up for, make a good TV show. He pulls in as they're filming me out in the courtyard, gets out, gets introduced, to all these guys with cameras, and he's bringing us food. He's donating food. And they go, wait a minute, you're donating food to your tenants? He says, yeah, I do it all the time, These guys are really good.
God provided these kind of people. Just
Yes.
out of thin air, it seemed. God provided these people that, how could it have been other than just a divine appointment by God? God worked this thing out. Unbelievable. So I'm just looking down here. So when Kenny left, you became the head, what we call the elder at Bereka House. And I see you spend a lot of time talking, going to schools, churches, Bible studies, rallies. And you say, I always ask the question before, did you have any struggles early on while you're going through all this?
God was just gracious to me. Currently I'm ministering to a lot of people who are coming out of heroin, coming out of meth. We're seeing here in Port Angeles and at our church a massive amount of drug dealers, addicts, alcoholics. Easter Sunday we baptized 29, all new converts. And I see them struggle. I see them, facing the temptation of going back in the drugs and, going through withdrawal. And I just didn't have any of those things. And, my struggles were in relationships. I was not gracious. I was arrogant. We had a tendency in the Jesus People movement, if somebody's story was really black and white, they would get to give their testimonies in public. So I was going around to Assembly of God's with a minister every Sunday night giving my testimony. Singing groups, not just Joyful Noise, but other singing groups, Andrew Crouch and the Disciples, John Fisher, Mark Snyder would invite me when they were in the Bay Area to come and give my testimony. I was the drug dealer who was saved and is sane because, God intervened. And so I didn't, those kinds of struggles, I didn't, temptation to go back to drugs, because that experience on the highway in my car was so powerful that, for 47 and a half years now, when things start going crazy and having 8 kids and pastoring for a number of years and working with home churches and working with denominational churches, you run into a lot of things. I've always been able, when I could still my heart, sense that peace that passes understanding, and that's gotten me through whatever the mess I've made or other people have made around me. And, it literally is just Jesus being gracious, because I didn't do anything to deserve it, in any way, shape, or form.
I ask you to describe yourself in terms of a theology, and you say, I am a spirit-filled follower of Jesus. And that's a good way to describe yourself, Cliff.
Well, you've got to use terms that separate whoever you're talking from their preconceived notions. Some people hear the word Christian, and as a non-believer, they have a picture of what that looks like. I don't fit that picture in any way, shape, or form, and try not to. And even among believers, there's so many dividing lines, and I'm trying to mature in Christ. And when I look at the scriptures, in John 15, Jesus talks about fruit and talks about pruning you, and talks about that. And the fruit he's talking about is things like love, joy, peace, not gifts or how big your ministry is or how dynamic you are. And I want to mature in love. And so I try to describe myself in a way that doesn't set off bells that I have to overcome to present who Jesus is. And over the years, I still use the same prayer that I gave in that Volkswagen Bug going up the highway, and we can look at, people that have prayed that with me. Peggy Burns prayed that with me. Stan Warner prayed that with me. I am so convinced.
Did you just say Peggy Burns?
Yeah, Peggy Burns, Bob Burns' wife.
Yes.
See, I led her to Christ.
I did not know that, Cliff. I did not know that at all. Let me ask you this. I think you told me that you had a list of about 500 people that you had prayed with. Is that right?
That was from August of 70 to August of 71 till January of 73.
And in that period, you had written down a list of 500 people, I think you told me,
yes,
that had become followers of Jesus through your ministry, and you did not put their names down until they proved themselves to be real born-again Christians.
Yes, and I did not count people who came to Christ in meetings that I was, giving my testimony. That's one-on-one. I've read, and I don't know I can't remember who the missionary was. There was some missionary to India who prayed that he could lead a person to Christ every day. And I thought, I'll pray that I can lead 2 people to Christ every day. God's big enough to do that. And that was how my early growth was. I would see somebody who I felt was farther along than me in the Lord, and I would watch them. And we at Baraka House, we'd have Bible studies and prayer meetings 6:30 every morning before we went on our day. Well, I see some guys like Kenny, like Dennis Flack, get up at 5:30 and pray and study before the meeting. And I went, well, they're maturer than I am. They know the word better than I do. They seem closer to Jesus. I'm going to copy them. Except in my arrogant, youthful exuberance, they're getting up at 5:30. I bet I can get up at 5. And, if they're reading, 4 chapters of the Bible a day, I bet I can do 6. And I would just copy them. Well, I read this, missionary book that, was around in the house. And this guy prayed that he could lead people, one person to Christ every day. So it's like, Lord, give me 2.
Cliff, when did you leave Baraka House? When did you leave the area?
I left Petaluma in '87. Just moved north of there. Married. Our 3rd child had a birth defect. And he is the oldest surviving person ever with his birth defect. In fact, when they finally properly diagnosed it, he was 5 months old, and he was the oldest surviving person ever with that birth defect. He is going to be 32 this September. And I had, in obedience to something that Jesus had said to me, had given my resignation at the Petaluma Open Doors. I was pastoring after coming back from starting a church in Redwood City, back to Petaluma. And we stayed in the church 2 years after resigning because I wanted to be real clear with everybody that there wasn't a problem, there weren't any issues. I was just doing something that Jesus told me to do. And we ended up moving to Roanoke Park, and at that time started attending Penn Grove Community Church, and then from there ended up at Hope Chapel in Santa Rosa. At the very beginning, I ended up being one of the pastors in the beginning of Hope Chapel when we went from a house church to a building and went from 12 couples to 5 services in 4 months.
I wanted to say to you, Cliff, that during that period of time, you meant a great deal to me. And you were somebody that we worked together very well. You handled everything wonderfully well. I don't think we ever had a disagreement. I don't think we ever got in a situation where we had even to confront each other over everything. I always thought of you as somebody we always worked very well together. That's my impression. I don't know if that's true. Maybe I was a bigger jerk than I thought I was. But
I would say the same thing. We just didn't have conflict. I always felt like you respected me, which was always a big issue for me, just that I would be respected. And you always did that. You always gave me that, even though, I was one of the younger upstart crazy guys, that would do stuff like, tell them to clean up and not tell them don't bury the car. And, obviously I didn't communicate everything because you didn't know I was picking people up off the highway every night. But
now I'm going to talk about your family a little bit, and it's all the stuff that you've been through. You've been married 3 times.
Yes.
Me too. Sometimes some people think, the Christians, everything's smooth. Everything isn't always smooth. What I always watch for is people who've been through hell a few times and still are following Jesus. That means a lot to me. And I love your testimony. You have 8 kids. 1 has a PhD, 2 have masters, 2 are business owners. 1 is teen director of Boys and Girls Clubs of America. My daughter is the head of a major social work program in Portland. One of my sons is a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and I have one in college at Columbia of Chicago, and the last one is in high school. 2 of their spouses have PhDs. One is a bakery manager. I have 5 grandchildren and 1 on the way. Wow. Quite a family.
You know, when I left the professional ministry, if we want to call it that, one of the things the Lord told me was to disciple my children. And we've had bumps. You know, they know my story. And I told them that I wanted them to be creative, and if they were going to mess up, to do different things than I did. But all of them have incorporated my core values of what I hold, the things I hold important in their hearts and in their lives. And my daughter got into social work. She graduated from University of Portland with an English major. She went in as a piano major and then with an English major. And her first year out of college, her church ministered in downtown Portland, washing the homeless's feet.
It says, the worst of times were when we had to bury 2 of my children who was stillborn. And then you told about the one child who was sick, it's an infant, and the oldest surviving person to live with this particular birth defect. And then you say, the end of my marriage of 33 years was very hard on me, and I can understand that. Then you say, I am semi-retired and have a small landscape business. I'm active in church leadership. I preach occasionally and lead midweek meetings and do pastoral care. Now we're going to end with your favorite verse. I've asked people for your favorite book in the Bible is Ephesians, and I'm going to read your favorite verse. It's Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. And I'm sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Philippians 1, 2. Cliff, thank you, man. Thank you. Thank you, brother.
Well,
for the